I do want to talk a little bit here about Steve Austin because it does feel like, this is the end of an era. And maybe it's one of the reasons why, it feels like such an interesting time in the company. Steve Austin and Vince McMahon have verbally agreed that they're going to do business together indefinitely. But they're going to sort of try to go their own separate ways because contractually, they're not going to work it out for him to be a full-time character. And that happens when they meet in San Antonio on April 6th. And one of the things that I saw in my research is that they're going to work on some of these projects together. Of course, they want to do a WWE film with, so he has a movie vehicle and we know what that's going to be. But I also saw that they had plans to market a Stone Cold Steve Austin beer. Now we know, fast forward, I don't know, a decade, and there was the Broken Skull IPA, but that's not what the plan was here. This is '04. So there was a plan for a WWE Stone Cold beer. Is that right? What can you tell us about that?
Well, we had been working on a beer probably since 98, going back in time of trying to do something with whether it was, whether it was Steve basically sponsoring a beer or having his own beer. And we had talked several times with different brewers across the country, across the world, to do a special beer, from the Coors Brewing Company to the, Anheuser-Busch, their light brand, to do something with that. And some Canadian beers had their hat in the ring, and it was an ongoing process. Trying to get through that process and weed your way through was a painful process in and of itself. However, we had talked about it. Yes, we definitely had been working on a beer for Steve for a few years at this point, and it had started to come to fruition, where it looked like it was actually going to happen when everything, communication and just disagreements, started to take place.
Let's talk a little bit about something that was written in the Torch. And I didn't know this. The WWE was under the impression that Austin was close to signing a deal with Dream Stage Entertainment, although those at DSE and others say the deal is not close to being finalized. Austin is said to be waiting for offers from any interested parties in Japan before committing to one, although DSE would have the inside track because they seem to have the most money and also have Bill Goldberg. So it is fascinating to me that even here in the early 2000s, or maybe the mid 2000s at this point, I guess for '04, when things in America aren't exactly what you'd like for them to be, you think, oh, well, I'll just go make money in Japan. That sort of feels pretty old school. But DSC, of course, is Dream Stage Entertainment. And some of our MMA fan listeners would be familiar with that because that's who put on the Pride events. Back in the day, there were two major organizations, the UFC here in America and Pride Fighting Championships, across the pond in Japan. And they also put on a series of wrestling events, named Hustle, and Hustle was going to be like their big new thing. When you guys hear, or do you hear that maybe Steve is talking about doing something in Japan? Because I mean, they did have some names that you would remember, from way back in the day, like Abdullah the Butcher, who was obviously a big deal in Japan. And of course they had big Japanese talent like the Great Muta, but they also had Goldberg once, Bob Sapp, who was a big name for a minute, which I know in hindsight doesn't seem like it should have been a thing. Did you hear he was talking to Japan, and was Vince McMahon concerned about that?
I don't think we were ever really concerned about it because of Steve's health and his neck issue being the way that it is. To work that style with Goldberg might have been different, because I think that Bill probably could have protected Steve and that they could have gotten through whatever they needed to get through in a match. But Steve going over there wasn't that big of a concern. And you hear those rumors all the time, especially in that time frame, because if a guy was unhappy, I'll just go to Japan. And Japan was also starting to lose its allure here because the the bigger companies just weren't doing the kind of business that they had done before. But I'm sure it was a rumor that was out there. And from our vantage point, as far as Steve going to work for somebody else on any kind of full-time basis, that certainly wasn't a fear. It was, well, we definitely want Steve for us. If Steve's going to do anything in the wrestling business, we want him to do it for us. And that was the battle. That was what was taking place.
It's speculated, of course, that what Hustle would want to do, and I don't think this is a big stretch, is if they were to land Austin, to try to do the match with Goldberg. And it just feels like an Austin Goldberg match not happening for Vince McMahon and instead happening for Japan would have made his freaking mind melt. Do you think that, hypothetically, if that discussion would have gotten farther enough along, and Goldberg was allegedly saying he wanted 7 figures per man to give Hustle the rights to market that match, do you think Vince would have done whatever he could to beat that offer and try to make that match happen in WWE?
I don't know if he would have. I really don't know, because obviously we never got there. It was never taken seriously to that next level. Had Steve gone to work for someone else in a wrestling capacity, I think that would have hurt. That would have hurt Vince. I think it would have hurt him personally. But it didn't. So it's kind of hard to speak to that. And if there was a match out there, the match was definitely Goldberg versus Austin.
Yeah. There would have been money in them, their heels. And Wade even speculates that he thinks it would do 375,000 or more buys if it was on a WWE pay-per-view, as a main event. Where does that rank with dream matches, do you think? It looks like we're going to get Undertaker Goldberg. Where do you think Austin Goldberg is all-time dream match?
I think it's right up at the top. I think you have, especially from the Attitude Era and the Monday Night Wars era, that was the dream match. There were really two. It was Austin Goldberg. I'll give it 3. Austin Goldberg, Austin Hulk, and Undertaker Sting.
Hey, it's Conrad Thompson here to tell you a little more about what adfreeshows.com is all about. Get early ad-free access to more than a dozen of your favorite wrestling podcasts every single week, starting at just $9. That's less than 20 cents an episode each month. And yes, you can listen to them all directly through Apple Podcasts or your regular podcast apps. How easy is that? Ad-free shows also has thousands of hours worth of bonus content and docuseries like Title Chase, Eric Fires Back, Conversations with Conrad, and The Insiders. Plus new series like The Book with David Crockett, Monday Mailbags with Mike Chioda and Nick Patrick, and a whole lot more. And you want to talk about early? You can't get any earlier than listening to the shows live. You can be a part of the live studio audience as we record the podcast. Plus ride shotgun alongside your favorite childhood heroes for live watch-alongs, Q&As, and other interactive experiences every single month. Come on now, see for yourself what thousands of other wrestling fans from around the world have discovered, that adfreeshows.com is the best value in wrestling. Check it out today, and hey, when you do, the first week is completely free. adfreeshows.com.